The diplomatic shuttle descended through the thick violet atmosphere of Zartal, capital world of the Galactic Empire. Inside, Ambassador Sarah Lawson sat poised, her expression a practiced calm, though every fiber of her being remained alert. Around her, a team of aides maintained the facade of a diplomatic entourage, American operatives in disguise, each trained for combat, but clad in formal attire. Commander Reynolds adjusted the cuff of his pristine uniform, suppressing a frown. His sharp eyes scanned the holographic readouts in his embedded wrist unit. Something felt off. The Empire had insisted on hosting the peace talks here, deep within their territory, yet their escort consisted of a skeleton crew, no honor guards, no ceremony. It was either negligence or a trap, and Reynolds never bet on negligence when dealing with hostile aliens. Lieutenant Harris, seated across from him, shifted slightly, his fingers tapping soundlessly on his thigh. A sniper by training, he caught the same tension Reynolds did. Sergeant O'Connor, an engineer specializing in adaptive warfare, gave a slow shake of his head when Reynolds glanced at him. No electronic interference yet, but that didn't mean they were safe. The shuttle docked. The landing ramp lowered to reveal the Imperial Hall of Accord, a towering chamber of polished obsidian, its architecture monolithic and unwelcoming. As Sarah stepped forward, a delegation of Imperial officials stood waiting, their reptilian faces unreadable. At their center, Lord High Arbitrator Voles, a towering figure draped in ceremonial robes, spread his clawed hands in mock welcome. Sarah extended a hand, her voice smooth. An honor to meet under the banner of peace. Voles's lip curled in what passed for a smile among his kind. An honor indeed. The Americans were led into the chamber, their polished boots clicking against the onyx floor. Around them, Imperial guards stood at measured intervals, their plasma rifles held at ease, but not far from ready positions. Reynolds counted exits, noted the camera placements, and watched the positioning of the guards. They weren't just security. They were executioners waiting for the signal. Sarah took her seat at the negotiation table, placing her hands flat on the surface. The Americans flanked her, their postures disciplined but unarmed. A show of trust. A test. Voles clasped his hands together, his yellow eyes gleaming. "Let us begin." Words were exchanged, meaningless pleasantries disguising the real power struggle at play. Sarah spoke of cooperation, of alliances, of mutual benefit. Voles responded with thinly veiled arrogance, weaving a false sense of superiority into every phrase. Then, as she spoke of Earth's willingness to broker peace, Voles raised a clawed hand. The guards snapped to attention. Doors slammed shut. The chamber darkened, leaving only the cold glow of the overhead lights casting elongated shadows across the floor. Reynolds exhaled slowly through his nose. Here it was. Voles's voice was almost pitying. "Your species is misinformed." Plasma bolts tore through the air. The first shots were precise, calculated, meant to kill Sarah and her team before they had time to react. But time had already been stolen in preparation. Reynolds moved before the first soldier had finished pulling the trigger, dragging Sarah down as a plasma bolt scorched the air where her head had been. Harris rolled, twisting mid-motion to disarm a guard before the alien could level his rifle. O'Connor lunged for cover, pulling two others with him, shielding them as the energy blasts shredded the negotiation table into molten slag. The room exploded into chaos. The Americans fought bare-handed at first, stripping weapons from the enemy, turning the Empire's arrogance against them. Reynolds snapped the arm of a guard, wrenching the plasma rifle free, and planting a shot into another before the alien could react. Harris, already behind cover, fired precise bursts, dropping Imperials before they could regroup. O'Connor, thinking 3 steps ahead, had already recalibrated his stolen rifle, modifying the frequency to pierce their shielding. Sarah moved with them, unshaken. Her movements were precise, controlled. The telltale signs of her past life as a Marine sniper surfaced in the chaos, evading line of sight, anticipating movements, striking with ruthless efficiency. She drove a stolen combat knife into the throat of an alien who got too close, pulling the body into cover as she ripped the rifle from his grasp. But the trap had been well laid. Reinforcements stormed in, locking down the exits with heavy firepower. The Americans had planned for treachery, but not for this level of overwhelming force. The balance shifted. Sarah made a split-second decision. Get out. Now. Reynolds barely hesitated before grabbing O'Connor and Harris, signaling the remaining operatives. They peeled away, splitting into tactical formations. Sarah remained in the crossfire, providing cover. Her rifle cracked precise shots, dropping Imperial officers, forcing the enemy to redirect attention. A final glance between her and Reynolds was all that passed before the operatives disappeared into the chaos. Then the chamber erupted with another explosion, and she was gone. Reynolds and his men forced their way through the outer corridors, tearing through resistance with brutal efficiency. The palace was a labyrinth, but they had memorized their way in. Now they had to navigate out with Imperial forces swarming like hornets. They pushed deeper into the underbelly of the city, vanishing into the tangled infrastructure of Zartal. Communications were cut. The Empire had wiped their access to the city's network. No way to call for extraction. No reinforcements coming. No way to reach Sarah. Harris reloaded as they crouched in a darkened passage, breath steady. They knew we'd come. They wanted us dead before we could leave. O'Connor wiped blood from his brow, his voice grim. Means they're afraid of what we might do. Reynolds' jaw tightened as he listened for approaching footsteps, his grip on his rifle firm. Then let's remind them why. Above them, the Empire prepared its final move. Below, the Americans adapted. The tunnels beneath Zartal stretched endlessly in every direction, a tangled mess of maintenance shafts, waste disposal routes, and forgotten infrastructure that the Empire's engineers had built over centuries. The air was thick with metallic dust, the scent of burning circuitry lingering from explosions above. Commander Reynolds led the way, his rifle at the ready, each step calculated. Behind him, Harris and O'Connor moved with the practiced silence of men who had navigated war zones before. The rest of the surviving operatives stayed close, their movements precise despite the chaos unfolding above. Somewhere in that chaos, Sarah Lawson was either dead or fighting alone. Neither possibility sat well with Reynolds, but survival had to come first. Their escape wasn't guaranteed, and every second spent lingering increased the likelihood of being cornered. O'Connor checked his wrist display. Citywide lockdowns in place. They cut every public transit route, jammed outgoing signals. We're sealed in. Reynolds exhaled through his nose, barely slowing his pace. Then we unseal it. Harris scanned the passage ahead. They'll have patrols sweeping these levels soon. We need a way to move without being funneled into a kill zone. Reynolds motioned forward, leading them deeper into the tunnels. He had studied the blueprints of this city long before setting foot on it. Imperial arrogance left them vulnerable in ways they never considered. Their infrastructure relied on efficiency, on systems running without failure. But systems could be manipulated. They reached an intersection where ancient maintenance terminals flickered weakly in the dim light. O'Connor moved in, fingers dancing over the controls, bypassing security measures designed for engineers, not infiltrators. The interface spat lines of alien script before surrendering access. Got it, O'Connor muttered. Utility tunnels up ahead lead to a substation. Power relays, ventilation control, emergency routes. His eyes flicked over the schematics. There's an old freight rail hub. If we can override the lockdown, we ride out of here before they know what hit them. Reynolds nodded. Harris, take point. The squad moved fast, weaving through the underground labyrinth, stepping over corroded pipes and forgotten machinery. The deeper they went, the more neglected the tunnels became, the Empire's obsession with order leaving entire sections to decay simply because they were no longer deemed necessary. A distant clatter echoed through the space. Everyone froze. Reynolds raised a fist, signaling silence. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Harris lifted his rifle, angling his head toward the sound. Movement. Multiple contacts. Reynolds gestured for cover, pressing against the wall, weapon ready. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the distinct mechanical whir of powered armor. Imperial security teams. Not standard grunts, these were shock troopers. The kind deployed when the Empire wanted something eliminated with certainty. The squad remained still as the patrol approached. Then, just as the first trooper's shadow stretched into view, Reynolds struck. A swift, brutal takedown, knife to the throat, hand over the mouth. The body dropped soundlessly. Before the others could react, Harris fired a suppressed shot into the second soldier's visor, the plasma round punching through reinforced armor. O'Connor disabled the remaining two with precision, rerouting the power supply of their suits mid-motion, locking their joints. The soldiers collapsed, trapped in their own armor. Harris finished them with a pair of clean shots. Reynolds wasted no time stripping the bodies of ammunition and data slates. They know we're down here. O'Connor worked quickly, syncing the stolen security credentials with his wrist display. But now we know how they're tracking us. A grim smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. They're cycling through thermal scans every 5 minutes. If we move right after a sweep, we stay ahead of them. Reynolds checked his chronometer. Then we move now. They pressed on, navigating the tunnels with renewed urgency. Each corridor brought them closer to the substation, but also deeper into enemy territory. When they reached the freight rail hub, the station was a ghost of its former self, massive loading cranes rusting in place, mag rails coated in dust from years of disuse. O'Connor accessed the terminal, rerouting power to reactivate the dormant systems. Harris scanned the area through his rifle scope. We're not alone. Imperial forces were closing in, blocking their exits. The enemy had anticipated their path, converging with methodical precision. Reynolds studied the map on O'Connor's display. We don't fight our way out. We go under them. O'Connor's brow furrowed. You're suggesting we take the old freight tunnels? Harris frowned. They haven't been used in decades. They could be collapsed. Reynolds' voice was firm. They could also be our only way out. O'Connor didn't argue. Instead, he brought the system online, forcing the rusted tracks to hum back to life. Sparks flickered as the long-dead machinery groaned in protest. One of the old transport cars vibrated as it reawakened, its engine sluggish but functional. Reynolds turned to the squad. We get on. We ride through. If anything's in our way, we deal with it. The operatives climbed aboard just as the first distant sounds of enemy forces reached them. O'Connor slammed a fist against the control panel, forcing the system to engage at full speed. The transport lurched forward. Above them, Imperial forces stormed the station, but they were seconds too late. The Americans were already gone, vanishing into the forgotten tunnels beneath the city. The transport car rattled violently as it tore through the ancient freight tunnel, its rusted frame groaning under the strain of sudden acceleration. The dim emergency lights flickered overhead, casting erratic shadows over the squad as they braced themselves against the walls. The air was thick with the scent of burning dust, the centuries-old tracks barely holding under the speed O'Connor had forced into the system. Every bump threatened to throw them off balance, but no one complained. Speed was their only advantage now. Reynolds stood near the entrance of the car, his rifle pressed against his shoulder, watching the tunnel stretch into the unknown. He knew the Empire wouldn't let them slip away so easily. The first sign of pursuit came as a low hum vibrating through the walls, distant but growing stronger. They're on us, Harris said, his voice calm despite the tension. He was crouched near the rear, scanning through the small viewport. Fast movers. 2, maybe 3 patrol skiffs. Reynolds didn't look back. How long? 2 minutes. Maybe less. O'Connor's fingers flew across his wrist display, pulling up the transport's ancient system diagnostics. This thing's running on borrowed time. We push it any harder, we're going to rip the motor straight out of its housing. Reynolds considered the options, eyes locked on the tunnel ahead. The freight route had been abandoned for decades, left to decay beneath the city. That meant collapses, dead ends, unstable tracks. If they didn't control their exit, the tunnel itself might become their tomb. Then we don't outrun them, he said. We control where they catch us. Harris nodded, already anticipating the command. Ambush. Ambush, Reynolds confirmed. O'Connor was already scanning for potential choke points, his mind working faster than the failing system he was trying to manipulate. There's an old access station about 500 meters ahead. Cargo offload point. We can bail there. Reynolds checked his rifle, then the squad. We hit hard, fast, and leave nothing standing. The plan was set. The transport screamed down the tracks, the sound of pursuit closing in with each passing second. The tunnel walls vibrated under the force of approaching skiffs, their engines built for speed, not caution. The Empire thought they had their prey cornered. They didn't realize they had walked straight into a hunt. As the transport reached the access station, O'Connor forced the emergency brakes into action. The entire car lurched forward, throwing up a storm of dust and rusted debris as it screeched against the rails. Reynolds and Harris were already moving before it fully stopped, taking position behind the scattered remnants of forgotten cargo crates. The squad fanned out, weapons primed. The first skiff rocketed into view, its sleek frame illuminated by cold blue underlights. The pilot barely had time to register the motion before Harris fired. The shot was precise, a single round punching through the exposed repulsor coil. The skiff lurched sideways, its propulsion sputtering in failure before it slammed into the tunnel wall, erupting into a brief, violent fireball. The second skiff swerved hard, its pilot reacting with military efficiency. Imperial soldiers leapt from the vehicle before impact, rolling into cover with well-trained precision. Plasma fire erupted in the confined space, the tunnel flashing in bursts of red and white. Reynolds ducked behind cover, returning fire in measured bursts. The Imperials fought with discipline, but they weren't ready for the brutality of close-quarters combat against men who had spent their lives in war zones. Harris moved with lethal efficiency, his rifle never still, every shot finding a target. O'Connor flanked wide, slipping through the shadows before emerging behind the enemy line. A well-placed knife, a silenced shot, two Imperials dropped before the rest even realized they had been breached. Reynolds advanced, a grenade primed in his hand. He lobbed it with practiced ease, the detonation sending shrapnel ripping through the last pockets of resistance. Silence followed, save for the crackling of burning wreckage. The squad remained in position, rifles sweeping the area, waiting for the inevitable counterstrike. It never came. Harris exhaled slowly, checking his ammo. That's not all of them. O'Connor was already pulling up data on his wrist display. His expression darkened. They're waiting for us at the tunnel's end. Reynolds took a deep breath, steadying his focus. Then we changed the ending. The mission wasn't over. The Empire had miscalculated once. It would happen again. And when it did, the Americans would be ready. The corridor stretched ahead, a cold metallic spine of the Imperial complex, humming with the low resonance of energy shields and distant machinery. The team moved with disciplined efficiency, their boots barely making a sound against the reinforced flooring. They had shed the frantic urgency of escape, replacing it with the quiet confidence of hunters closing in on their prey. The objective was near. Every corridor, every intersection, every locked security door was just another step closer. Reynolds signaled a halt as they reached a junction. O'Connor was already interfacing with a terminal, his fingers moving across the surface with practiced precision. His eyes flicked over streams of alien code before he found what he needed. Security station up ahead. They know we're coming, he murmured. Full lockdown protocol in place. No way out through conventional means. Reynolds considered the options. The Imperials weren't looking for a fight anymore. They were trying to trap them. A contained kill box where overwhelming numbers could do the work that skiffs and patrols had failed to accomplish. It was standard doctrine, predictable in its rigidity. Harris knelt beside the opposite wall, his rifle angled toward the path ahead. They're betting we try to punch through. Reynolds exhaled slowly. They'd lose that bet. O'Connor tapped into the system, running a rapid analysis of the facility's power grid. His expression shifted slightly. There's an auxiliary maintenance route below us. Old service tunnels. We'd be off their scanners. Reynolds nodded. Do it. The hatch was pried open in moments, leading to a rust-coated ladder that descended into darkness. One by one, they dropped into the tunnel, the air thick with dust and the scent of industrial decay. They moved in near silence, following O'Connor's guidance through a maze of forgotten corridors and long-dead machinery. At every turn, the tension grew. The Imperials weren't just trying to contain them anymore. They were preparing something. The weight of unseen opposition pressed against them, a force waiting just beyond their vision. Then they saw it. The final corridor leading to the extraction point was lined with heavy turrets, the kind designed for suppressing armored assaults. Beyond them, Imperial shock troops stood in disciplined formation, weapons raised. At their center, a high-ranking officer waited with the confidence of a man who believed the outcome had already been decided. Reynolds analyzed the field. The enemy had them funneled, expecting desperation, reckless aggression. They were waiting for a charge, for a futile last stand. They had made a crucial mistake. O'Connor's voice was calm. There's an access point to the left. It leads to the ceiling supports. Reynolds adjusted his grip on his rifle. We take the high ground. They moved without hesitation, slipping into the secondary passage while the enemy remained fixated on the main corridor. Harris took point, his sniper's eye measuring angles, distances, wind currents within the artificial environment. Every calculation was instant, every adjustment precise. When the first shot rang out, it wasn't from below. It came from above. The officer barely had time to react before his command collapsed around him. Targeted precision eliminated key gunners first, their heavy weapons silenced before they could fire a single round. Panic spread through the formation as controlled bursts from multiple angles disrupted cohesion. The Imperials scrambled, their doctrine unraveling under an enemy that refused to fight on predictable terms. They attempted to rally, but every movement was anticipated, every adjustment countered. By the time Reynolds dropped into the chaos, the fight was already over. The officer, wounded but still breathing, looked up in stunned disbelief. The arrogance was gone, replaced with something else. Fear. Reynolds leveled his weapon. The mission was complete. The lesson had been delivered. The Empire had tried to execute an American diplomat, believing they were eliminating a weak, defenseless target. Instead, they had provoked something they couldn't control. He lowered his rifle slightly. "Tell your superiors," he said quietly. "Next time, we won't be this patient." The extraction was swift, methodical. As the team disappeared into the depths of the station, leaving only bodies and scorched metal behind, the Empire was left with a truth they would never forget. America didn't send diplomats to beg. They sent them to remind the galaxy why humanity was never prey.